Well, good evening. I want to welcome you to Just My Two Cents, really, uh, the teaching ministry and the question answering time that we have together. I'm switching this to evening. So I've been thinking about it and praying about it, and I'm going to be doing this a lot in the evening, probably between 8 and 9 o'clock. So I feel like I'm going to be reaching more people. Some people have even suggested it, and I've given it some thought, probably too long. Anyway, so I'm going to be answering questions that people have asked me over the years and things that I've thought of, things recently that I'm dealing with. And so I have questions all the way to the end of the year. So we don't get on every day, but we're going to get on at least 3 or 4 times a week just to answer some questions. I want to also encourage you to join me on Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock for a book launch. My new book, The Ancient Creed. We're going to talk about it and introduce it to you, and it'll be at 35% off that night. And so I hope that you join me at 8 o'clock on Wednesday evening. I'll be back tomorrow night to answer another question, and then probably on Thursday night again. Let's get right to the question. And the question is, should you and I have close friendships with the opposite sex as married people? All right. Let me ask that question again. Should you and I have close friendships with the opposite sex as married people? Now, that's a pretty practical question, right? And maybe you're thinking, well, really, is that important a question? Well, I think it is today. And we're going to define the boundaries of friendship. And you might be surprised by where we go with that. So the question is, do we run any risk or reward by being close friends with the opposite sex? Now, certainly there's a little bit of a difference if you're single. Okay. I think you can have some friends that are the opposite sex, which probably you've discovered that my answer for being married is you can have friends, close friends who are the opposite sex, and you would be right. No, I want to develop that in a moment. But as a single person, you can develop those relationships. Now, there needs to be boundaries even in those relationships, certainly, because boundaries are so important in relationships, period. So it is different, I believe, for a single person than a married person. Okay. And there's a lot of different things that I could say about that, but I don't want to talk about that tonight. That'll be another broadcast. But let's talk about the risk and reward, right? And say you're a man and you have some girl/friends, and then you meet somebody and you eventually get married to them. What happens to those relationships, right? What happens to those relationships? Well, those relationships have to be tamed. They have to be walked down, right? They have to be, I believe personally, it's a matter of wisdom rather than legalism. Okay. In other words, the scriptures don't really say that we need to not be friends with the opposite sex. I mean, the scriptures, I don't believe, say that. Okay. But I think from Genesis to Revelation, we see the issues that you can have in that situation. And so boundaries are so important in that relationship. So what I'm trying to say is those relationships probably can continue from afar, but not in a way that you had that relationship when you were single. Okay. Because now your wife or your husband are involved, right? And they need to know exactly what's going on. And we've seen recently in church ministry, pastors who have had these relationships with the opposite sex and gotten themselves into trouble. And may have not done anything that we would call sinful, right? But there was that beginning of possibly an emotional attachment, which leads me to talk about that. And that is that the boundaries really are stepped over when we are either by ourselves or talking a great deal to someone who's the opposite sex while we're married. and those boundaries need to be honored. And so we can't do that. Okay. Now I've practiced for 35 plus years of having that. And in this season of me being single, my situation has changed a lot. But I am still very careful because I'm programmed and programmed in a good way. But when I was married and I was especially a pastor and still am to some degree, I have to be very careful with the opposite sex. I never met with the opposite sex. I'm not saying I've never done it, but I would say 99% of the time, I never met with women by themselves, my age or close to my age. My wife was always available, or another woman, right, secretary, whatever. And so I was very careful about developing a relationship. And I didn't develop a texting relationship with any woman at all. And I think in a lot of ways I've been saved from some of the scandals. And listen, I'm not finished yet. Satan is always trying to work me over in every area of my life. So I'm not boasting about it. I'm saying that me having boundaries and me being accountable to my wife, right, has allowed me to stay above the fray in that area. Okay. And so the question, let's get back to the question, is it wrong for us to have a close friendship with the opposite sex as a married person? And I'm not sure it's wrong, but I think it's unwise. Now, there are a lot of issues in Scripture that are not principles, but they're wisdom issues. Okay, they're wisdom issues. Certain things, right? Certain things the Bible doesn't say you should not do this, but in wisdom we look at it and we say, well, Satan can really get in there if we're not careful. It's like maybe hanging around in a bar every night, right? And you say, well, I don't drink, or I don't have a problem with drinking. Well, if you're there all the time, you may end up having that problem. May not. Not necessarily wrong, right? Unless you love that kind of fellowship and that kind of atmosphere, and then maybe your affections are wrong at that point. But I'm talking about just being there. You really run the risk of being in that situation where sooner or later you may fall into temptation and begin to take on the express purpose of where you're at rather than who you are. Okay, and I hope that makes a lot of sense. So, for wisdom issues, for staying above the fray, for respecting your husband or your wife, you need to be accountable to who you're talking to. You need to be careful. You need to back down your friends that you once had as the opposite sex as friends, as a single person, and now they become around your wife or your husband, or around their wife or their husband, and everything is above board in that way. Okay. And I think this is something that younger people have a problem with more than older people, because we had that thinking, right? When those that are above 50, we had that kind of thinking to be careful about that. And the younger generation doesn't really have the same thoughts about boundaries. So I think it's extremely important that we reintroduce that again to the church, to ministry, and just to life in general. I mean, I don't want to ever be involved, or I don't ever want to see my kids involved or people that I love involved with the opposite sex in a wrong way. And it always starts off as an innocent thing. It always starts off as an emotional thing, right? And sooner or later, there's a problem, and there's separation and divorce and ugliness, and it's just a bad scene. So be careful. Be careful on social media, right? Facebook can be, there's nothing wrong in and of itself. Obviously, I use Facebook every day for ministry and for reaching out to people in a right way. But we can be very we can be tempted greatly by the enemy to be able to cross lines of communication and wise communication with the opposite sex. So be careful about that. Well, I could talk more about this. I hope that brought value to you tonight. Once again, we're going to move to the evening sessions, and hopefully you'll see this live or get this maybe before you go to bed, or maybe early in the morning, you can listen to this as well. Invite somebody to listen to these broadcasts. Hopefully, they're helpful to you and helpful to those who will listen. Well, God bless you. Have a great rest of the evening. Get some good sleep tonight. And Lord willing, we'll see you again tomorrow.